Well, Uchilasi, Gwe, bienvenue. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jill Van Horn, and I use she, her pronouns. And I'm the director here at Food for All New Brunswick, Aliments pour tous NB. So just a quick note for everyone joining the call here. Today's event will be in English, but we do have excellent interpretation services available. And so by clicking on the interpretation button, which is a small globe-like icon at the bottom of your screen, you can choose your preferred language between French and English. And Saravia will be our interpreter today. Alors, l'événement aujourd'hui se déroulera principalement en anglais, mais des excellents services d'interprétation sont disponibles en cliquant sur le bouton d'interprétation en bas. Alors, c'est un bouton qui ressemble à une petite planète. Alors, au bas de votre écran, en choisissant votre langue préférée entre anglais et français, et vous allez entendre Saravia, notre interprète aujourd'hui. I'll give a moment for people to choose their language of their choice. And I'd like to begin today with by acknowledging that I work and live on the ancestral and unceded lands of the Mi'kmaq here in what we now know as Moncton, New Brunswick. And the land on which Food for All carries out its work is the traditional and unceded territory of the Wolastoq, the Mi'kmaq, and the Passamaquoddy nations. September 30th was a National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, and Food for All prepared a news blast to go out with some resources to support folks in their learning journeys. We know that Truth and Reconciliation Day is one day of the year, but we can engage in action and work in this area every day of the year. And so we'll put the link to that newsletter in the chat. So if you'd like to access the resources, you can. And so Food for All is a provincial food security organization. We work to inform, connect, and engage New Brunswickers in food security for all. And some of the ways that we engage in this work are by hosting informational webinars like this one, by administering the Community Food Mentors program, which is a series of capacity building sessions to develop food leadership in New Brunswick. We host conferences and local events, which have been on pause for quite some time since COVID-19. And we also host a food programs map and different resources and publications on our website. We share out bi-weekly newsletters on all things food, and we support the development of comprehensive food action and policy. And so today we're super pleased to welcome you to episode number 6 of What the Food, which is our webinar series intended to help us tease out some of the nuances of food systems language. There's so many terms related to food systems and food security. We have household food insecurity. We have food sovereignty, food workers. What the Food is a place to help us untangle that web a little bit and deepen our understanding together. And so today we'll be talking about migrant workers in New Brunswick and the food labor behind what's on our plates. I'm going to invite Audrey, our communications coordinator now, and our tech host for the call to go over a few housekeeping items with everyone.
Hi, everyone. We're all used to virtual convening, but we would ask that you please stay muted to limit any background noise during the interview time. And also, we'd love to see your faces. So if you want to turn on your videos, we are recording the event, but only for people that are speaking. So unless you are unmuted, you won't be recorded. And lastly, please use the chat box if you want to ask some questions during the interview time. And we'll also reserve about 15 minutes at the end of today's event for the Q&A. And during that time, you can ask questions using the chat or by unmuting yourself. Back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Audrey. So, today, I'll introduce you first to our panelists. We have today's speakers joining us from the organization Migrant Workers Alliance for Change to talk specifically about migrant food workers in New Brunswick and in Canada. And so first, I'll introduce Niger Saravia. He spends his time organizing migrant workers in New Brunswick, and he's an organizer of the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change in New Brunswick. It's a member-led organization of migrant farm workers, care workers, fishery workers, and students that seek to win worker and immigration justice. And the organization is a member of and also serves as the secretariat for the Migrants' Right Network and Migrants' Right Network Ontario. So Niger was born in El Salvador. He came to Canada in 2011 after living in the US for 12 years, where he started to work with undocumented migrants from Latin America. Saravia's team is targeting New Brunswick's seafood industry and its increasing reliance on the labor of temporary foreign workers, which we may refer to as TFWs. So the industry was worth 1.8 billion in exports last year alone. Members of the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change have been demanding a regularization program from the Canadian government and permanent residency status to all migrants with temporary status, including TFWs. Next, we have Sonia Aviles, who was born in a refugee camp in Honduras during the civil war in El Salvador in the 80s, where she spent her first 4 years. Her family moved back to El Salvador in 1989 when there was still a war conflict. And at the age of 18, she moved to the US, where she started organizing undocumented migrants with the Migrants' Rights Action Committee, as well as working with victims of labor trafficking, Sonia came to Canada in 2011, and that year she started volunteering as an interpreter for the Migrant Farm Workers Clinic, which was a project aimed at providing healthcare services to seasonal farm workers in the Niger region. In 2014, she developed an English language program which aimed at teaching farm workers about common work language, as well as about their rights here in Canada. Sonia coordinated the AWA Support Center, which was a project sponsored by the United Food and Commercial Workers from 2015 to 2018. Not only all of this, Sonia has been working with the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change since 2018. And she worked as the lead Spanish organizer for farm workers from 2018 to 2020. And she was recognized as one of Chatelaine's Women of the Year in 2020 for her organizing work. So we've plopped a link in the chat as well, if you'd like to read more about that. Since 2021, Sonia's been the national case manager for the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change. Her role is to provide in English and support in English and Spanish to farm workers, migrant students, and many other migrants. She currently resides in Miramichi, New Brunswick. And so now that I've introduced our panelists, as you can probably tell, they've got a vast experience in this area. And so now as we move into this discussion, I just want to be sure that our audience is aware that Sonia and Niger will be sharing some stories and experiences of migrant workers in New Brunswick. And we want you all to be aware that some of that content might be triggering. And so please take care of yourselves as we go through this. And so without further ado, we'll get talking. So to start off, Sonia, can you tell us a little bit about the history of the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change?
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Jill, for that kind introduction. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Sonia Aviles, and like Gil said, I've been working with temporary foreign workers for 12 years. And I'm going to give you just a snapshot of who we are, and to remind everybody that this conversation and this topic is very extensive. We are hoping to cover some of the key issues and encourage everybody, during and after the conversation to ask questions, research, and educate yourself about the issue that we're going to address today. So who is the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change? We are a membership-based migrant-led organization that supports migrants across Canada to access basics, rights, and services. So basically, we support the formation of migrant workers peer support groups, online and offline, at their workplaces, communities, schools, and in person, as well as online, like I mentioned. So we work more like a democratic union. But how do we do this work? We operate phone and WhatsApp hotlines in English and Spanish for migrants without permanent resident status to call and ask and put out their issues to us. We'll respond to all questions we receive, including about employment, housing, immigration, healthcare, and other social services anywhere in Canada, as we are connected nationally with other organizations across the country. And just a little bit about a history about the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change. Our history goes back to 2008 when care workers, who are also known as domestic workers, started working, organizing to fight for one of our colleagues, Juana Tejada, who was a care worker who was denied permanent resident status based on medical inadmissibility because she had cancer and failed her medical exam. So for the first time in history, we started organizing care workers. And that same year, a coalition was formed that started fighting for permanent resident status for temporary foreign workers. As a result of workers' fight, laws that made recruiting fees illegal were created in the province of Ontario. And just to point out, we don't have any current laws that regulate recruiters in New Brunswick, despite that many workers still pay recruiting fees to get a job in Canada, which is illegal. So then that same coalition became the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change, which is us. We realized that we had the power to win public policy, but we needed to start organizing directly with workers. And we also realized that workers on temporary permits have a lot in common. And so right now we have expanded our work to 5 sectors. So we work with farm workers, Caribbean and Mexican workers, care workers, who are also known as domestic workers, migrant students, also some people refer to them as international students, fishery workers, and undocumented healthcare workers. So basically anyone that doesn't have permanent resident status in Canada. In 2018, we formed the first national coalition of organizations in Canadian history, which is the Migrant Rights Network. As Gil said, we serve as the secretary of the Migrant Rights Network. And the Migrant Rights Network is a coalition of over 40 organizations across Canada fighting for migrant rights. So that's just a snapshot of some of the work we do or who we are.
Thanks, Sonia. And maybe we'll move right into the next question. To give us some context, can you talk about the types of agricultural programs that Canada has with other countries? Absolutely.
So I will give you a bit of a background history of, because I know the presentation we want to, people here have interest in seasonal workers in New Brunswick, but it's hard for us to give a context only in New Brunswick without talking about the full history of the Seasonal Agricultural Workers Program. So basically, the Seasonal Agricultural Workers Program, which is known as SAP, CAWP, exists under the Temporary Foreign Workers Program. And it's basically a bilateral agreement between Canada and the participating countries, which most of the workers who come under the SAP programs are from Mexico and the Caribbean islands. The program was created in 1966 to help meet the needs of Canadian agricultural producers. Jamaican workers were the first to arrive in Ontario to work the fields, and then Mexican workers joined in the late 70s. This Seasonal Agricultural Workers Program has been around for 57 years, so it's not new. There is nothing temporary about this program. It's actually a permanent program that has been going on for more than half a century. So employers can hire workers under the primary agriculture under 3 or 4 main programs. So the Seasonal Agricultural Workers Program, which I mentioned, has workers from the Caribbean and Mexico. So essentially the contract is negotiated between the 2 participating countries. The agricultural stream, which is all countries, including the Philippines, Honduras, Guatemala, and many other workers that have joined over the past 10 years or so. The low wage stream, which is where fishery workers come to work in New Brunswick and other provinces in the Maritimes. And the high wage stream, which is usually for truck drivers, nurses, engineers, So Canada has over time expanded its dependency on temporary foreign workers, not only in the agricultural industry, but also in industries like fisheries. In New Brunswick, in the Atlantic in particularly, we have seen an expansion in the last 7 years or so, and more so after the recommendation from the House of Commons in 2016 to make the program, to open up the program more. And more so after the global pandemic that we just had 2019 and 2020. So only in New Brunswick alone in 2020, we received 2,858 temporary permits for TFWs. That number has doubled in 2022. In 2 years, we have received 5,196 permits issued. So we can only see, like that can be replicated or can be seen in other provinces in Canada. So some of the countries, like I said, where workers come from are mainly Jamaica, Mexico, the Philippines, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Dominican Republic, some countries in South America, as well as Europe and a few from South Africa. So more and more, the temporary foreign worker program has opened up to more people from around the world to apply and come and work in Canada. So workers come under these programs anywhere from 6 weeks, who are the workers who usually come and do the packing of fruit, for example, which is mainly women. And so something to mention is that women in agriculture, in the seasonal agricultural worker program, are at a disadvantage because they get the lower contract. So sometimes people come up here for 6 weeks. And in those 6 weeks, people sometimes ended up working only 1 month. So we see, that the inequality in women having access to income in the farm workers program and the temporary farm workers program experience there. So this means that workers come in contracts from 6 weeks to 2 years. They are only allowed to work for the employer that is written on their work permit. So imagine yourself, if you were let's say you work for a company and you can only work for that company and you only have a work permit that you can use there. Even if you were facing abuse, you're not allowed to leave the company because your family depends on your income. So this is what happens to temporary foreign workers. They are vulnerable because to exploitation and abuse. Many of the workers come from rural and indigenous communities. For example, Mexico and Guatemala, that Spanish, isn't even their first language. So throughout the years of my work, I have seen many instances of those indigenous communities being further vulnerable because they don't speak, which I speak Spanish, but many of them don't even speak or write or read Spanish. So for workers in these situations, speaking about their rights means they will lose their job and will be deported. So many of you might have seen a recent example in the news from fishery workers from a plant in northern New Brunswick who organized to ask for better working conditions and that their contracts be respected. But they were unfortunately terminated and many were sent back to their home country. Some of these workers have been supported by us and are still getting support from us. So basically, without permanent resident status, we will continue to see more in this situation of exploitation. Temporariness is the mechanism through which this workforce is kept captive. So where you might be asking where the most TFWs travel to. So the top 3 provinces that receive temporary foreign workers, including many seasonal agricultural workers in the agricultural industry, are Ontario. In Ontario, which I have most of my experience doing field work, visiting farms and seeing firsthand the conditions of workers, they mostly grow tender fruit, vegetables, work in the wine industry in vineyards, greenhouses, nurseries, as well as meat raising and packing. British Columbia is the second largest receivable of temporary foreign workers. They work in berry production, but also work in greenhouses and vineyards. Quebec is the third one. In Quebec, vegetables, they work in vegetables, organic greenhouses, and others. And like I said, we're seeing an increase in the last 7 years or so, workers traveling to the Maritimes. As we have seen big influx of, internal migration within Canada from people moving from other provinces to New Brunswick, we see that as well, that the number of temporary farm workers and the reliance on them in the fishery industry, it's growing. The industry that hires seasonal workers are mainly agriculture, we'll say is the top one. Food and service industry. So we are seeing more workers come in doing work in hotels, restaurants, fast food chains. Third one is aquaculture, which is the seafood processing and packing plants, transportation, healthcare workers, trades like welding and constructions. So basically, we are seeing an increase on a workforce that is, I call it like it's the perfect migrant and the perfect workforce, because the government puts little effort into having these workers be the backbone of the economy, but they don't have full rights. They don't have full rights and protections. Their temporariness and their closed permits puts them in a situation of exploitation. And I think I'll leave it at that for now.
Thanks, Sonia. Yeah, we'll bring it over to Niger. And Niger, I didn't point to you to introduce your role, so if you want to take a moment for that. And then Sonia has touched on some, but what are some of the other issues that workers face when they come to work under the temporary foreign workers programs?
Yes, thank you, Jill. Welcome everyone to this sort of a presentation. Just keep an eye on the time because it's a big issue that we cannot be able to finish it up in 1 hour. As Sonia mentioned, the TFW program has been in place for decades now. And we know that this program was designed to exploit migrant workers. When the beginning of when this program was designed, that was the goal, to give employers the power to decide over the life of migrant workers. Now let's talk a little bit about the abuses that we're seeing every day in across Canada. This is not just one industry, one province, but we're seeing all these abuses over and over across Canada. One is human rights violations. Examples, workers are being called names at the workplaces by local workers and supervisors like donkeys. You guys need to work like mules. And there are being, in some of the workers who have a different sexual orientation are being discriminated against by the supervisor, or in some cases by local workers, by prohibiting them. The supervisor, in this case, an example, was prohibiting a couple from the LGBTQ plus community to hug or kiss outside of the workplace, because she said that this is not usually this is not more common in small towns. So this couple got reprimanded by the supervisor because of their sexual orientation. We also see in a labor abuse. So my colleague Sonia was mentioning, breach of contract, not getting paid what the contract is stipulated, reprisals, terminations. In this case that my colleague Sonia was talking about in New Brunswick, when workers try to assert their rights through the support of our organizations, what they get in return from the employer is reprimandal, reprisals. In this case, the employer forced the workers to sign a termination letter, and they ended up deported by the employers. So this is some of the labor abuses that we're seeing: lack of access to income as a result of the contract breach. In workers need emergency food. Let's say what we're seeing in the Atlantic is that the season goes up and down, and when those downs comes, workers basically don't work, and if they don't work, they don't get paid. So that means they don't have food to send. They don't have money to send to their families, not even food. So workers ended up asking the community, starving, and reaching out to organizations like us for food. And so far this year, we have distributed 150 boxes of food. Last year, we distributed more than $17,000 to workers. And employee, we are doing this, but this is not the organization's responsibility. This is the employer's responsibility, but they basically are getting away with that. Mobility issues, so in some cases, workers call me at night and say, look, we can't leave the house after 10 p.m. Employer has installed some cameras and we cannot leave the house. We can invite friends to our house that we're paying, and they're paying like high amount of rent. You're seeing houses in small towns that are being rented to the migrant workers, $4,000 a month, $5,000 a month. It's unbelievable how the whole system is taking advantage of the workers. So these are some of the examples that mobility issues. Now, if we talk about the work injuries, most of the work injuries, they don't get reported to the supervisor because the employer takes reprisal over the workers and they ended up sending those sick workers back home. I had a clear example. One worker, she developed an allergy to the crab. So one day she fainted at the workplace while the supervisor just went and grabbed some over-the-counter medication and give it to her. But the systems continue the next day. So what they did is they simply buy an airplane ticket and she was sent back to the country. When she got there, she ended up in an emergency room in their country because she was poisoned with some chemicals that they use in these processing plants. So, and we also have the abuses for our recruitment agencies. Recruitment agencies are charging a large sum of amount of money to workers, offering them, in some cases, telling them that they can come here to get a permanent resident, or telling them that if they want a spot, secure a spot at the workplace, they need to pay. So, and this is some of the abuses that workers go over every single day. And another clear example that the province is taking advantage of the workers is that workers pay into the system, in the federal system and the provincial system, but they're not getting the services that the Canadian society receive. They're not enjoying those services. One example is when they get sick, if they go to the hospital, well, they don't have the Medicare because the province have decided that workers who come under 1 year work permit, they're not allowed to get sick that year. And this is another example of how the system is set up, that from the recruitment agencies are abusing the workers up to the federal government. So workers, they have to be here at least 2 years in New Brunswick to receive the healthcare. And employers provide, the private insurance, but in some cases, workers, when they go to a hospital, the bills are so high that they ended up paying the premium, so they don't have money to pay the premium. So workers try to avoid to go to a hospital as much as they can. One, because of employers' reprisal. Two, because they don't want to end up, with a larger bill to pay. So this is some of the abuses that we're seeing, not just in the Atlantic, but across Canada.
And certainly thinking about COVID-19 and those closed quarters, where we're living together, we're so close, and illness spreads really quickly. It's not realistic to expect anyone not to get sick in a year, but certainly that exacerbates the problem. Niger, we'll stay with you, and if you can talk a little bit more maybe about the food sector, both agriculture and aquaculture, and how sort of dependent is our Canadian food systems and New Brunswick food systems on migrant workers. And so That's to say, what's the comparison between the number of Canadian workers and the number of migrant workers that support growing and seafood industries?
Yes, just in 2022, 1.2 million people came to Canada, and these workers are divided between, international students, temporary workers, and others. The bulk of work permits holders is the 77% in the 2022. Like in total, there were like 472,000 plus work permits that came in effect just in 2022. As my colleague Sonia was explaining, the TFW is breakdown in categories. Like the agriculture workers is holding the 51%. Other temporary foreign workers with LMIA, 46%, living caregivers, 2%, and other caregivers, 0.2%. Plus, we have 0.5 million of undocumented workers that at some point they came into the program, but because the system is designed to exploit migrant workers, they ended up kicked out of the program. So they are joining the numbers of undocumented workers. Plus, you have to add that we have in total 1.7 or more now million of migrant workers. So basically, we're saying that we have a 2.5 million plus migrant workers without permanent status. So all of these workers, they don't have access to services such as, medical assistance, labor rights, and workers are separated from their family. So what that means is that between 12 and 17 people in the country don't have permanent resident status. And when that many people don't have full rights, it's affect not just them, it's affect the whole economy. It affects the one who is working at the office. It affects the one who is cleaning our schools, because migrant workers are taking care of our kids, are cleaning our schools, preparing the food, growing the food. In transportation, we have seen that migrant workers are working there too. So just to give you an example, the agriculture in Canada is a huge, huge business. That is the 5th exporter agri-food, larger than Jamaica GDP, which is 17.10 billion of US dollars. So when you have a program that half of a century that has captive labor forces in rural areas, facing all these kind of abuses, living in bad condition, then you ask yourself, is this kind of society that we want to live for the new generations? And I bet, of course, not. So that's why we are building power to fight for a permanent resident for all the migrant workers across Canada. So as my colleague was saying, that we're being seen in the Atlantic, specifically in Brunswick, the pattern is growing. Every year, more migrant workers are coming, and of course, this is gonna be the trend that in 10 years we're gonna have a huge amount of migrant workers being exploited by the employers.
Thanks, Niger, for outlining some. And I think, one thing I meant to mention at the very outset is that I think here in New Brunswick, we may not know a lot about this program. So the program and the people that are coming, it's perhaps here and across the country, a very hidden system from many of us. So I'm so pleased that you're both here today to help shape that story and what it means for us here. Sonia, if we can go back to you, and if you can think, there's certainly so many myths and misconceptions about migrant workers, generally speaking, and certainly migrant food workers present in New Brunswick, present across the country and in the world. Are there some that you would like to address here for us today?
Sure. Probably thinking one of the top ones that I've heard in my time living in the US, in which kind of echoes also in Canada with the anti-immigrant sentiment growing, especially during the Trump administration, is that migrants workers are taking our jobs, right? Are taking the jobs of locals. Well, employers hire temporary foreign workers because they are easy population to exploit, right? They cannot keep you captive, you know, like somebody that's a local won't put up with the conditions that migrant workers put up with. And again, going back to their work permits are tied to their employers, so their housing depends on the employer. So many of these workers are employer-provided housing. Speaking about the rights means deportation and blacklisting from the programs. So oftentimes they don't complain. A lot of times you hear from employers in the government saying, and certainly it has been changing slowly, that why workers don't complain, why workers don't say anything. Well, when your family's livelihoods, you're the only breadwinner of the family, depend on you, workers think twice about complaining. The issue here is that without permanent resident status, workers are not able to exercise their rights. When a large number of our workforce doesn't have full rights, it lowers the bar for us all. So at the end, we're all affected by this. We cannot have equal rights when a large part of the labor force is treated as a second-class citizen. And usually the employers want a workforce that's there for them 24/7. We have known stories of workers who are made to work 14, 16 hours a day, sometimes 7 days a week without a day off. They work under the rain, snow, extreme heat. You know, we have seen this exacerbating by climate change. This year particularly, so many workers with issues with heat stroke and the results of working long hours in the heat. Many workers are getting sick with use of pesticides. And I could go on and on with other examples that workers I speak to every day. Another misconception that it's been probably popping up in the media and the national conversation is that, hearing the migrants are causing or exacerbating the housing crisis. Some people are scapegoating and using migrants for their advantage. But the reality is that we are all in a housing crisis with the cost of owning and renting. Corporate and landlord greed is responsible for housing crisis, not migrants. In New Brunswick, for example, the rent cap ended in 2022. So, people are paying more for rent, and we know that rent has increased 10% in the last 10 years. Greed and government inaction to build subsidized housing is what's causing the problem. Some figures that I would like to give you is that population growth, immigration population growth, it's only 0.5 of the population. Another thing that we often hear in the news is that immigrants are putting the system of immigration in crisis. The reality is that immigration is still catching up. During COVID, a lot of these applications were put on hold. And so now we're seeing that immigration is catching up, and many people are experiencing longer than waited times in their application processing. And again, corporation greed, landlords are choosing not to build houses because if there's a high demand and there's not enough housing, then you can charge more for rent, right? And like Niger said, one clear example that we see that this is affecting migrant farm workers and temporary foreign workers is that some workers are paying huge amounts of rent. And some of them are even sleeping in a closet, paying $400 a month a piece. And the other thing also to point out is that the Canadian government stopped building homes, during World War II, when soldiers were coming back. They built houses to provide for them. But ever since the 90s, the government kind of pulled the plug on building subsidized housing. And all levels of government need to step in to address the housing crisis and stop scapegoating migrant workers for that. And the last one, very quickly, just to be mindful of time, is that many times people say a lot of people are entering Canada illegally. But the reality is that the majority of people who are undocumented at the moment, they once had a work permit. they had a valid authorization to be and to work in Canada. But for many reasons, including safety, some of them going back home is not an option. Also, the lack of permanent residency opportunities for seasonal workers, which are the vast majority, of workers that are excluded from the current PR programs, forces workers, when they're facing abuse, to leave the farms, and then they lose their immigration status. There are some options, such as the open work permit for vulnerable workers, but our experience tells us that that is basically a revolving door where workers apply for a permit, but then after a year, they're not able to renew it. And then we're seeing a lot of people fall into the being undocumented.
Thanks, Sonia. And I'm sure many in this Zoom room would remember at the outset of 2020 when, as you mentioned, Sonia, the temporary foreign worker program was put on pause. And here in New Brunswick, the call went out to New Brunswickers to step into these roles, and there was not a lot of uptake on that. We depend so heavily on these highly skilled individuals to come to these farms and help fuel our food system, help to make sure that we have food on our plates. And also it seems that perhaps some of these housing issues might be very invisible to many of us. It doesn't sound as though migrant workers are always part of the mainstream housing system regardless. So thanks for covering some of those points. Sonia, if we can stick with you, something that was a bit more visible in the news not that long ago was the Safe Third Country Agreement and its consequences. And so we wondered if you can explain some of the basics around that.
I'm gonna do just a quick, overview. But basically, for those of you who don't know, the Third Country Agreement is basically an agreement between Canada and the U.S. where migrants or people who are transitioning to countries, for example, in the U.S., are supposed to claim asylum in the first safe country, right? Which in this case, people traveling south to north will be the U.S. What happens is that, as you might follow, the U.S. fall into a huge crisis with many migrants entering the country. And so many people, even if they want to claim asylum in the U.S., that's not possible, right? Many were rejected. Many were incarcerated, including women and children. And so many people were entering Canada. Basically, the Safe Third Country Agreement says that if you don't claim refuge in the first safe country that you find, then you're supposed to do that in order to qualify to do that in Canada. So many people, because we have prior to 2023, March 2023, when there was an amendment in the first Third Country Agreement, people were able to enter through unofficial borders. There were official borders where people will do the claim, but people were under international law. They had a right to enter and claim asylum. So people were entering through unofficial borders. And we heard that some people were being sent to Montauk and Fredericton and Niagara. And so the US and Canada renegotiated the agreement and said, as of March 2023, people are not able to do it anymore unless they meet the some exemptions. If they have a family member who's a Canadian citizen or permanent residence, if it's a minor child without parents, and people who hold other type of documents, including a work permit. So that's just an overall on what the Safe Third Country Agreement is. But we have seen that ever since the renegotiation of the agreement, migrants are choosing dangerous routes to cross into Canada. And just a few weeks after the Third Country Agreement was renegotiated, a group of 8 people drowned trying to cross the border, including a Canadian citizen, a child, minor child. So it's basically more devastation and more death and more, to migrants who are trying to escape and find a better life for their families.
Yeah, it's extremely heavy information to take in, and it's important that we're aware of that. Can you talk a little bit, Sonia? We have just a couple of minutes left for this. Just some information about how that has impacted detention centers, for example. I'm not sure that many of us are aware of what's going on there.
Okay, so basically just to touch quick on migrant detention centers. In Canada, just to give you a bit of a background, Canada used to have what we call indefinite detention, which Canada was condemned internationally for that, which meant that there was no timeline of how many years a migrant will be in prison if they were arrested, and kept in detention and facing deportation. And so in 10 years ago, 191 immigration detainees in a prison in Ontario went on hunger strike, asking for an end to indefinite detention. So as a result of that, the government was forced to revise the indefinite detention, and they made some changes and some more around guidelines for CVSA and to make sure they are following the guidelines to have people in indefinite detention. So this act of courage from detainees made it so that Canada doesn't have the length of time that it had to have people in prison. We knew of cases of people who had kids, in detention, like kids being born in detention. And now the longest serving a sentence is 2 years compared to 15 years, what it was in the past. And another interesting thing that we're seeing, waiting to see how we'll develop, is that historically Canada has used provincial jails to put people in detention. And so recently Alberta canceled their contract with the federal government to house detainees, immigration detainees in provincial jails. As a result, those detainees were transferred to jails in BC. And so what we're seeing now is that there's a lot of confusion, because even though those detainees are in jails in BC, they still have to have legal aid from Alberta, for example. Some of those are some of examples of the challenges that people in detention are facing. We have three places where immigration detainees are housed, in Ontario, Quebec, and BC. Those are the three ones where we have the immigration detentions. And basically they work kind of like some of the healthcare. They're public, but they're also private, because they're run, their security is private security. The food is like Sodexo, for example. So it's semi-private run. Yeah, that's the information I have in the interest of time as well.
Thank you, Sonia. Yes, and it certainly just it makes an already complex situation even more complex, certainly. So as you said, in the interest of time, Niger, we'll hand it back over to you. We know that you recently attended a Senate committee hearing, and we wondered about, the recommendations that you've put forward for policy change and for legal reform.
Yes, one of the main recommendations is that for the senators that listen to migrant workers, listen to what they're saying. They're saying we need a status for all. So that's one of the main recommendations. And even the Prime Minister in 2021, December, he promised a regularization for undocumented workers. So, what we asking is uncap and one-step regularization, that all undocumented workers, without exclusion of any kind, with their families, be able to apply in a single-step permanent resident program. And we're also asking that all undocumented workers, while they go through the process, they get work permits and study permits. So I'm gonna leave it like that. So since we have identified all the issues with the programs, Migrant Workers also have a solution for this. And they're saying we need a status for all, because with permanent resident, we'll be able to leave abusive employers without fear of eviction and deportation. We'll be able to assert our labor rights in our workplaces. We'll be able to use the healthcare system, which you are paying into it. So with that call, migrant workers are organizing themselves across Canada. Migrant workers are asking and demanding the Prime Minister to fulfill his promise. And just talking a little bit about the organization who are working or involved in the Status for All campaign, as my colleague was mentioning, the Migrant Rights Network, which is one of the largest coalition in Canada, is working. We are working together to pressure Prime Minister fulfill this demand. And what we're asking is, as already mentioned, that everyone in the country without permanent resident status must be regularized with permanent status immediately. This which include low-wage residents, migrant workers, study permit holders, undocumented workers, and those who enter Canada with before or those who are here without any status at all. We are in the campaign. We are after the minister shuffles. The talks about regularization are on hold. So we continue to have action across Canada, and we keep organizing workers, and the workers keep saying over and over, enough is enough. It's about time for us to enjoy what the Canadian society is enjoying, which is all the services, all the benefits, and enjoy their rights and assert their rights at the workplaces. So we're calling to actions to all of you that are here today, that join a local migrant group in your community. And when you see a migrant worker, go and talk to them, ask them, acknowledge them. Visit your local MP and ask them to support migrant workers. Write letters and sign petitions that we have online, and attend events like this so that you can get more a sense what the migrant workers are going through every single day.
Thank you so much, Niger. I mean, I can imagine people coming to Canada have a story about the Canadian society and might expect to come into that and be surprised a bit by what they meet. And also just, your points about the length of time that this program has been in existence. I'm certain that many individuals have been expressing these needs for over a half a century, as you put it. And so important when we talk about nothing about us without us, or nothing about a population without them being present to support the solutions. It's so important to listen to the people that are doing the work. And so, Niger, I think you've covered, what the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change is advocating for, and some of these other recommendations. Are there any other points that we haven't asked you about that you want to touch on before we open it up to a broader Q&A for the rest of the group?
No, I think we're ready for the Q&A.
You ready? Okay. I want to thank you so much for sharing this information. It's been absolutely amazing and very informative. And so now we'll move into a Q&A with the rest of the audience. We have a really healthy amount of time, actually. Niger and Sonia are extremely skilled at doing these presentations, and I just want to let you both know we're coming in under time. And so there's even more space for our Q&A this afternoon. Audrey, I think we'll need to allow people to unmute themselves. So in case anyone would like to ask a question, you'll have to unmute yourself, and just note, if you've been using the interpretation services, you'll just need to turn off your interpretation first so that others can hear you if you'd like to ask a question. So we invite anyone to unmute and ask. You can also please feel free to put your questions in the chat box, and we can address them from there. Who will be the first to ask a question? And while we wait, I wonder if maybe one of you, Niger or Sonia, if you can sort of explain the process for migrant workers coming to New Brunswick. So, how do individuals seek out these programs? What do those agencies look like, or are there recruitment programs that exist?
Niger, would you like me to?
I'll touch a little bit on that.
Go ahead.
Yes, there's two different ways that they come to here, especially in New Brunswick. One is through the National Labor Secretary in Mexico, and the other one is through recruitment agencies. And how the workers that I'm in touch with, they find out by word of mouth that someone from the town came, and that's how they they get the recruitment agencies to get the workers. One interesting fact is that one of the recruitment agencies from Newfoundland and Labrador was founded by one of ministers. I believe he was the labor minister. So he is the CEO. So what we see in that some of the politicians are seeing that seeing migrants that there is a potential to make money there. So they are creating these recruitment agencies to take advantage as well. I don't know if you want to add a little bit more, Sonia.
Sonia, you're struggling because I changed a setting and I shouldn't have. So let me just adjust that. My apologies. There you go.
Thank you. I was about to type in the chat.
Sorry.
So basically, what Niger explained is that under the free trade agreements, some governments, such as the government of Mexico, run the seasonal agricultural work program through the secretary, through the Minister of Labor, basically. Will be equivalent to the Minister of Labor. So workers can apply through their Minister of Labor and also through recruiting agencies, which a lot of times are connected to employers or, like working hand to hand with employers or supervisors, or it's very messy.
Thank you both for that. I'll pause again. I see a note here from, and I hope I say your name right, Mwalu Peters. Thank you for this presentation. I hadn't heard about the group of fishery workers in New Brunswick who faced forced termination and deportation. Could you tell us more about this case and maybe ways that we can get involved in solidarity action with migrant workers in this industry? Thank you so much for the question, Mwalu.
Yes, this is a group of migrant workers that they were not working. So basically the employer he was not paying them. So they ended up, starving, looking for ways to get food. So that's how they get in touch with us. And they have specifically, they want to demand the employer to fulfill the contract. That was basically what they were asking for. They were not asking for anything outside of the contract. And so they met with us and we advised them, with information and how to proceed. But the employer knew that they met with us. So the next day, he forced the 25 workers to sign a resignation letter, threatening them that if they didn't sign the resignation letter, he was not going to pay for the airplane ticket to go back. So which workers said that they didn't, most of them, they were afraid, they didn't know what to do. And he was threatening them to deport them, to send them back even if they wanted or not, and not coming back, or basically banned from coming back to Canada. The employer also took away the way of transportation as to prevent the workers to communicate themselves, to have a meetings basically. And so they decided to go public and they were on national news talking about all these specifically issues. So I hope this answers your question.
If I may add, part of the question was how you can support the workers, right? For privacy reasons, we cannot share more information, but keep in touch if you want to sign up for the on our page on the Migrant Rights Network. We are in the process of figuring out ways to legally support the workers to see what things can be done in regard to their case. And just so you know, even if workers are sent back to their home countries, they still have a right to start a case with the employer for termination and things like that. But we will, keep in touch with us. We'll keep you posted if there's a need to do any solidarity activities with these workers, then we will for sure let you know. As well as keep an eye of upcoming events, because our regularization campaign, we will be doing some events this hopefully this fall, and so we'll keep you posted on that. And thank you for your interest.
Yes, and we've posted a link to the Migrant Rights Network, so that link is there, likely to go sign up for newsletters. But we'll also, just a note, we'll be sharing out the Migrants Workers Alliance for Change details as well. So in our share back email, if anyone's missing that, we'll be forwarding out links that were shared by Niger and Sonia, if you'd like to get more involved. There's a couple of other questions here in the comments. So before we move to those, Niger and Sonia, I've read about Madhu Verma Migrant Justice Center, and as well as the Filipino-Canadian Community, COMM, and then in capital letters, the word unity of New Brunswick. I wondered, are those still active groups working in New Brunswick, and are there others that you would point to?
Yes, they are. We actually have we work in partnership with mostly with the Madhu Verma Center. We have a system of supporting organizations, supporting each other, but they're still active. And I know the Filipino community also still does, mostly, in my understanding, settlement work for Filipino workers.
Okay. There's a question, I think, that is in line with Mwalu's question. So if conditions are poor for migrant workers, why do some choose to still come to work? It says, I know that some people don't have an option and they need to leave their country, but why not go to a place with better conditions? And how is it still allowed in Canada, this mistreatment of workers? If you can answer at all or add some context to that.
For sure, I can do that. So people do reach out every single day, trust me, about how they can leave employers. Like probably the top question we get is, how can I change the conditions in my work permit? It's not as easy because, like I explained, they have a closed work permit, right? Which basically, to give you a context, not anyone in Canada can hire a temporary foreign workers. Employers need to have something called LMIA, which stands for Labor Market Impact Assessment, and basically is they need to prove that they have tried to recruit local workers in order to be able to hire temporary foreign workers. So once a worker is with a closed work permit, it's not as easy to switch to another work permit, right? So, for example, workers who are the victims of abuse, they can apply for the open work permit for vulnerable workers, which is we've been supporting dozens of workers obtain that permit. The issue with the permit is that it's only given to workers for 1 year. So essentially, it's just a Band-Aid. It's a revolving door. We've known workers that have applied for the open permit for vulnerable workers with legit proof of the abuse. And then after a year, they end up in the same place. They basically have to find an employer that has an LMIA to hire them and give them a closed permit. So a lot of workers come to us and we document the abuse. And once you tell them what it is with the open permit, even if they're facing abuse, they decide not to go forward with the complaint. Another thing is, of course, those workers come from underdeveloped countries, and when you compare how much money they make in Canada to their home countries, a lot of them even choose to remain in the country and work undocumented to be able to provide for their family, because even though the conditions they face are really bad once they lose their status, they still need to provide for their families back home. So within the legal system, there's very little options for those people that fall. And what happens is at the end, people end up falling under the cracks of the system. And that's why we have so many undocumented people. And just to correct a little bit of what Niger says, 1.5 million undocumented people, not 5 million. It's 500. That's our conservative estimate, right, of people who are undocumented in the country. It could be more at this point. But yes, I hope that answers your question, and you can ask follow-up questions if that's not clear.
Yeah, and that is the challenge with undocumented workers, is that we don't have documentation. So having the estimate, we see often that those estimates, they're likely much higher than what we think to be true. There's a question in the chat about whether or not you may have observed any trends with temporary foreign workers as it relates to the healthcare sector. As we see the New Brunswick healthcare system in particular decline, there have been some serious events in New Brunswick's healthcare center for those who are able to access hospital services, including individuals that have died in the emergency room. And so are there trends that you see as it relates to temporary foreign workers in our healthcare sector?
Niger, would you like me to jump in? Okay, so basically, yes, we have. And as you know, access to healthcare, it's very limited to temporary foreign workers, like Niger explained. Most workers who are in the province are not eligible for Medicare, starting with that, right? Workers need to be working for a full year in order to apply for Medicare, okay? So many of the workers who work with from fisheries, they only work contracts of up to months. So basically, they're not eligible for Medicare. What happens is that the employer pays a private health insurance, which in many times, workers are not even given the health insurance card. You know, like if employers applied or don't apply, many workers don't get access to that right away when they arrive. So we have been contacted by workers who really need the medical assistance, but don't want to go because they know they will have to pay for healthcare. And can you imagine if the healthcare system is declining for those of us that have the Medicare? Can you imagine how worse is for workers in a vulnerable situation? We actually had one case of a couple they were temporary foreign workers and had a child born here in Canada. Service New Brunswick was refusing to give a health card to the baby. That baby went 18 months without a health card. And they were arguing that because the parents were not permanent residents, then the child didn't qualify, which is, it's wrong. You know, like unfortunately, some of the workers with the government don't have the proper information. So we have seen those instances, and also it affects workers even more. You know, with our declining healthcare system for sure.
One question, another question in the chat is, would workers hired through the Atlantic Immigration Project be considered migrant workers? Or is this different since they're working towards their permanent residency and are not temporary workers?
Can you repeat is it through the Atlantic immigration programs?
That's right.
Technically, for us, for our wording around migrants is anyone without permanent resident status. So if they are in transition to be nominated and accepted, they are still migrant, of course. Once they get their permanent residency, then they will have permanent status, basically, if that makes sense. But they're temporary while they wait, right? Because as you know, if they haven't received confirmation, then they don't have the full status, right? The full permanent residency.
Thanks, Sonia. This question's come up, I think, could you talk a little bit more about which industries in New Brunswick are bringing the most temporary foreign workers and where in the province are they located, which I imagine would be across the board, but can you talk a little bit more about that?
Niger, if you could do that, please.
Yes. What we're seeing is that more than 50% are coming into the seafood industry, which is big in New Brunswick in the Atlantic. And then farm workers, and then it goes down to transportation and tourism, hotels, and all of that. But the biggest portion we believe it is in the fishery sector.
And did I have the number correct? Because the number of migrant workers in New Brunswick that I saw was less than, I think, what you mentioned, Sonia, which was over 5,000 that it had increased to in New Brunswick?
Those were the permits issued for temporary foreign workers, right? Not necessarily seafood fishery workers. So fishery workers, we have an estimate between 2,500 and 3,000. That's the estimated. Only fisheries. The 5,000 number I mentioned was permits issued for temporary foreign workers for everyone, not only fishery workers.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I wondered, I saw, one of the news stories that I read was about the challenge for workers to express their needs, to ring the alarm and say there is some abuse going on here, and that I believe one of your colleagues in New Brunswick had sort of a WhatsApp group, and I think this was maybe a little while back. But how do workers typically get in touch with you folks? Because I can imagine there would be so many barriers, especially if your employer is also your landlord, and you've got a curfew and all of these things. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, one of the ways that the workers are getting in touch with us is that, let's say a worker came to work in Ontario and they get in touch with an organizer in Ontario. So they got the number through that organizer, got my phone number. Or by word of mouth, like workers know, like when they contact us and we support them, they share our contacts. This is one way. The other way is the outreach events that we do. We go and meet the workers at the workplaces or close to the workplaces. So that's another way that they come to us. And we're seeing, like, for example, I have a worker that she was here this season, but because the season was really bad and she didn't want to put up with all these abuses, so she ended up going back to the country, and now she's expecting to go to a different province. So she'll be sharing my contact information in a different province, and hopefully in that province is not going to be a little bit different, because we know that the issue in the Atlantic is the industry itself. It's not just one bad employer in one town that is doing that. It's across the Atlantic.
Right. It's not just one situation. This is replicated and duplicated across the board from what you're seeing. There's another great question from Adrian Prideaux. You mentioned climate change earlier. And he's curious if you have any insights on what further issues we can expect as climate change results in increasing migration, because there are many other areas of the world being more impacted by the effects of climate change and displacement, and particularly with the expected impacts on agricultural sectors in the global south.
I can touch.
I can speak a little bit from last year. The climate change is affecting the people who are getting affected first is migrant workers. For example, last year that we had Fiona, when I ended up receiving lots of calls from workers that didn't have nothing to eat, they didn't have power, and their houses were flooded, and they didn't work for a couple of weeks. So they're the ones who are being affected the first. The issue here is that in New Brunswick, we do not have a system in place to assist those workers when emergency weather-related events happens. I reached out to the government, and the answer that I received last year was, no, we only have a system in place for employers, but we don't have nothing for migrant workers. So they are the ones who are being affected first, but they are the ones who are being neglected by the federal government and by the provincial government too. So I would say they are the first in line when it comes to the climate change.
Sonia,
I would like to touch more on the global context, right? Because I know the question was towards that. We have definitely already seen climate change impacting some of the workers we're in contact with from the Caribbean, specifically from Jamaica, who are not able to do farming the way they were doing. And that pushes them, to find other ways of making money to support their families. Well, we are definitely seeing that as well as in other countries in Mexico, in other countries in the global south. And I do think that climate change will have a huge impact in migration. It's probably only the tip of the iceberg what we're seeing, unfortunately. A lot of those communities depend on the farming in near coastlines where when we have hurricanes, there's floodings. We already seen that a lot. And like I said, specifically in Jamaica, in Honduras, we had a group of workers who were from the coast of Puerto Cortes, which is a Port Cortes, whose whole town was flooded. So some of those workers were already working in Canada, and facing issues as well. But again, they had to continue to work here. They couldn't go back, even though some of them had the plan to build their houses and and go back to their kids and wife. But the hurricane wiped out everything, so they had to continue working in order to rebuild basically again. But I definitely think that there's a huge connection between the climate change and how it is affecting, will affect globally, but also internally as well. With fires in BC, for example, I am actually dealing with cases of female farm workers who were, basically displaced from their place of work and then are going through issues at the moment. So we will see that globally. And like I said, unfortunately, we will see more. And also internally in Canada. And I think workers are also, migrant farm workers are also part of the solution, right? Because a lot of those have extensive experience in farm work. There's so much knowledge that it can be used here to transform the system and the ways in which we do agriculture. Because, a lot of the agriculture that's done in Canada, for example, is at a large scale that has a huge impact with greenhouse gases in the climate. So they have a lot to contribute as well to the full conversation on climate change and how to not reverse. I'm not sure if we can reverse at this point, but ease the changes and the what we're facing, in the Atlantic with the rains and stuff. So
yes, we know we'll have to adapt to climate change, and I hope we would be able to mitigate those impacts to help slow that speed. But as you're speaking, I think about people that must be working and then in their home, at their home where their families are, if there is extreme weather and a disaster where everything is wiped out, how that must be to not have maybe even a chance to connect or to find out if their families are safe. And then what happens next as we think about those spaces becoming unlivable. Will we be able to address, the fact that a family member is here in Canada? What does that mean for keeping families together? Like, how do we go forward thinking about that? Thanks for your input on that. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add. I did have another question and just a bit of a clarification, because Niger, earlier you mentioned the distribution of food and food baskets and money to migrant workers. And I wrote down, I didn't know if this was correct, but 150 boxes of food and $117,000, I think. I just wondered if you could clarify a bit and just explain a bit more about what's behind that organizing. Who is collecting the food for these boxes and making sure that folks can access that, because it's a huge undertaking on top of the work that you're already doing to organize. Who leads those efforts?
Yes, last year was 17,000. 17,000, yes, just in one workplace. And that was distributed in gift cards. They were donated from another organization to us. We just only coordinate that effort. And that was just one workplace. The issue here is that we don't have a system in place to support migrant workers. So the organization, ended up doing pretty much everything. Like so far this year, we have donated I believe, 150 boxes, and we'll still have to keep going until the end of the season. And this is an agreement with another organization that we received the food boxes from them, and we're starting to create a system for the migrant workers. Because we know that now lots of people across Canada relies on the food banks. So when we reached out to the food banks last year, they didn't have the capacity and they didn't have the food. Same thing happened this year. So in that sense, we as an organization decided to, okay, let's take on this, because workers are calling every day, not just from one area, but from all different areas where the fishery processing plants are located. So yeah, it is a lot of work, but I guess we have to do it.
It's a need, and so often before the systems are in place, these efforts are taken up by community that care in order to make sure people are getting what they need, but it's absolutely not enough to serve those needs. I wonder if there's any other questions from the group. We're approaching the end of the event, but we still have a few minutes left. So if there's any other questions that folks have, feel free to unmute yourselves or to plop the question in the chat. And also to the Food for All team, just to make sure that I haven't missed any questions from the chat, if you can help make sure that nothing has gone unasked.
I think one of the things that we missed out is somebody asked where workers located. Niger, you that are in contact, maybe can give
Thanks, Sonia.
an idea of that, because I think it will be useful for us to have that content.
For sure, thank you.
Yes, I mean, workers are located from the Canadian Peninsula down to, well, all the coastal line. I don't feel comfortable giving exact locations, but I would say we are covering the most of the processing plants, which they go from the Acadian Peninsula down to St. John. So those are you can find on the internet the places where the most of these processing plants are located.
And so, in other words, migrant workers will be everywhere throughout the system and throughout New Brunswick as well, because we're not just talking seafood and agriculture. As you mentioned, there's so many other sectors of care work and transportation. These individuals are everywhere across the province, from edge to edge and everywhere in between.
Yes, this is an issue across Canada, from BC to Nova Scotia. We're seeing that every year, every day, we're receiving calls from migrant workers in desperate need. And we can avoid all of this by the government providing them permanent resident and the status for all the migrants and undocumented workers. I mean, we talk about the issues, we talk about the programs, but we also talk about the solutions. So it's not that we're still looking for a solution in the coming years. Workers already have identified the solutions. So it is simple. Just give a status to all migrant workers, and we don't have to deal with all these issues that are affecting all of us, small communities. So that will be the solution.
Right. Thank you, Niger, for the reminder that these workers have been expressing their needs for a long, long time, and that I'm sure many of those pieces haven't changed, and that we do have solutions as recommended by the people doing the work. There's one more question. I think we can fit one more in 1 minute. So thank you so much for the informative discussion. Across the board, we have a lot of gratitude, I see. And Genevieve's curious to know if the Senate was responsive to the recommendations that were proposed.
I believe they're still in the process of writing a report. So they met with workers and met with employers. Workers were clear, expressing explaining them their abuses, and giving them the solution as well. So now we just have to wait if the Senate is gonna more take the recommendation from the employers or take their recommendation from the workers.
And Niger, is there any timeline? I know that these things are often sort of maybe a bit foggy after those Senate committee hearings happen. That do you have a sense of a timeline to see a report, or is that more up in the air?
I will say next year, but it's up in there. We don't have a clear timeline.
It's a bit of a guessing game.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you so much to both you, Niger, and Sonia, for sharing so much information with us. For the audience members that are left, as we went through the planning, we were so impressed and also, a bit sorry that we gave you such a large task. This is a huge topic, and I think maybe an entry point for many New Brunswickers. So I just want to express such gratitude to you both for taking the time to introduce us to this topic. I want to say a big thank you to our funding partner, which is the New Brunswick Department of Health, and to the Food for All team, of course, for their stellar organizing, and to our interpreter Saravia for her interpretation services today. And of course, to all of our audience members for joining us. So we'll be sharing a link to a really quick survey for folks to fill out. It really helps us in planning future events. So we hope you can take a few minutes to fill that out. And we'll also be emailing the participants in the next week with a recording, which we'll be putting up on our YouTube channel, the survey link as well, again, and the number of resources that Sonia and Niger shared with us. As always, everyone is welcome to contact us at info@foodforallnb.ca. You can find out more about Food for All NB through the links that we'll be sharing in the chat. And I think that covers this introduction. I won't say this covers it, because there's so much work to be done. And so I want to thank you all again for being here. I hope everyone has a great end to their day, and we'll be following up by email in the next week. We appreciate it so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Sonia.
Thank you for having us. Gracias.
Sí, that's all I can say. Sí. De nada. Thanks, Niger.